Thanks for coming out. I'm Ann Smith. I'm the executive director here at Featherstone, and welcome. This is literally one of my favorite nights. Every other year, Billy gets to come to Featherstone, and we're always so happy. It is just wonderful to be able to support one of the nicest men in the world. He's very special to us, and just can't tell you how happy I am that he's here. A few thank yous. A Bunch of Grapes Books has been here selling Billy's books, so I hope you've had an opportunity to purchase especially his newest book. And if you haven't, I think Molly is hanging out there in the back for a little bit, so wave, Molly. Book manager at Bunch of Grapes, so we're always happy to have Molly in the house. They're a wonderful partner. And it's really important that we support our independent bookstores, so please support Bunch of Grapes. Thank you to my staff who really makes this happen. You know, we try to think about what are we going to do for 200 people and try to make this nice, especially since this is a fundraiser for Featherstone. So we decided to go with fudge this year, Murdoch's Fudge. It seemed to be a big hit along with the wine, so I hope you enjoyed the sweets. And for those who have imbibed too much, the restrooms are right up the stairs in the gallery. And we will stop because you all have to pay attention to Billy. So no more wine until afterwards. But thank you for coming. I want to introduce my partner in crime. I call him my poetry man. It's Justin Aaron. And Justin and Fan Ogilvie and I have been, and my mom Francine over there, have been planning poetry readings at Featherstone for, I think, 10 years. And this is Billy's 4th time at Featherstone, and we are always just amazed that he says yes to us and that he keeps coming back every other year. So I think we've already got him locked in for 2017. He's saying, yeah. So Billy read with Justin the other night at the Nuepe Center. Justin runs the Nuepe Creative Writing Center, so please support Nuepe in Edgartown, and Justin, my poetry man.
Thank you, Ann, very much. Wonderful. So great to have these beautiful grounds and this beautiful tent and space to do these great readings, and Featherstone does an absolute amazing job. I don't think I could pull this off, and she does it effortlessly and with so much grace. So thank you, Featherstone. Also, I'd like to thank Marianne Goldberg, who could not be here this evening, but she really underwrites this. She runs the Pathways Projects Institute up in Chilmark, and she supports artists and creative people all throughout the year here on Martha's Vineyard. She does these wonderful things at the Chilmark Tavern all through the winter, where there are open mics. I think it's more than 3-4 times a week. There are people up there doing these wonderful events. If you haven't seen that and you're here in the winter, check those out. And she helps run this, so it's really wonderful. So thank you, Marianne, for your help in doing that. So I think we're trying to get Billy to move here. I think if we just figure he comes here enough, eventually he'll be seduced enough, and he'll just buy a place and be part of the year-round community here. But who knows? We're trying our hardest. But in the meantime, he has a permanent room 7 at Nuepe Center anytime he wants it. Absolutely. So it's my pleasure to introduce Billy's introducer, and that would be Mr. Arnie Reisman. Arnie Reisman. In 2014, he was named the Martha's Vineyard Poet Laureate for a 2-year term. He is a member of the Martha's Vineyard Poetry Society and the Cleveland House Poets. He is also a columnist for the Vineyard Gazette, a playwright, a filmmaker, and a radio performer. Please welcome Arnie.
Thank you, Justin. Does this clash? Do you have a blue? Few people know this, but Billy Collins is my father. I realize he's only 1 year older than me, but frankly, if it weren't for him, I wouldn't be standing up here. I certainly wouldn't be writing much poetry, at least not for public consumption. Reading Billy Collins made me want to reboot my life. In fact, if there is such a thing as reincarnation, I'd like to come back as Billy Collins. My father used to make a joke about reincarnation. Well, I'm going to test this audience to see if you get this. He thought it was nothing more than pouring the milk back in the can. I'll wait. At any rate, it inspired me to write a poem, and I'm only going to read one. And it's called As If Souls Are Costumes. Nobody was ever just a nobody in a previous life. Everybody was a king, a queen, a conqueror, a concubine, never a baker, a barber, a butterfly, never a livery driver, a Red Cross worker, a bottlenose dolphin. As if souls are costumes. As in, you used to be somebody, but now you're just passing through. And since your inner salesman once not only cut the Gordian knot, but also tied it, attention must be paid. As if spirits hang in the backs of closets. Driven by the fear of insignificance, you walk around a past you never had, hide inside a museum made of air. Miss the meaning of significance, the meaning of life in the moment. You don't have to be St. Francis to talk to the sparrows. You don't have to be Joan of Arc to hear heavenly orchestras. You don't have to be Shakespeare to know the world can be rotten, full of accidental judgments, casual slaughters. This is the time on earth, smell the sun, reap the wind, investigate love, pet a dog, search the wonderment in his eyes. You may see me looking right back at you. Actually, I don't think I would have written that without Billy Collins on my shoulder. He showed me another way, an accessible way, a divine way to look at the universe, to look at the nooks and crannies and nuances, to really look at poetry. I like poetry and think everyone should. It's the perfect format for the attention challenged. The end product is usually briefer than most creative endeavors. To me, it's a mind exercise, another way to look at something. It's layering words, distilling meaning. It's a love of language, its cadence, its rhythm, its music. In one sense, poetry can be jazz. To me, it's riffing. Billy Collins makes you rethink poetry. It can be a synthesized sentiment, a condensed insight, a snapshot of a truth, a condition or a mood, an observation of one of life's absurdities or illusions, a song to ponder rather than sing, an arrangement of words as if in a bouquet or even a puzzle. It's a love, a passion, a fever, a playfulness, a satire, a rearrangement. It's putting language through an autopsy where ideas can go autopsy-turvy. And so now, I would like to hand this evening over to the Grand Medical Examiner of American Poetry. It's a great honor, and it gives me a great pleasure to introduce the former poet laureate of these United States as well as New York State, and he'll sign books afterwards, Mr. Billy Collins.
Thank you. Yeah. Great to see you all. Justin, thank you for giving out my room number. Susanna did not feel the same way, but... And Arnie, son, you have learned well. But this night is not about you. Nice try, slipping that little pen in. All right. So if we can get focused now. How great to be back here. I mean, Anne said, I'm so nice to come here. What? It's this middle of the summer in Martha's Vineyard. I'm going to start paying you to come back. Well, you don't pay me anything, so that's... But I will come back, of course. So here we are. So let me read some poems, and I don't know, no one mentioned the question and answer, but if you want to, I'll leave a little time if you wanted to have a little conversation about stuff. So some of you have heard some of these poems before, not all of them, I hope. But life is full of repetition, so. Here's a poem called "You Reader," and it's just a poem in which I express my awareness or the presence of or the presumed attention of the reader. All of my workshops I teach in poetry, we start with the indifference of the reader. The reader is in the default position of the reader is indifference. You have to win the reader over. No one. Anyway, then a few of them drop out. They say, "I thought we were here to express ourselves." No, you're seducing the reader. Anyway, so it's called "You Reader." I wonder how you are going to feel when you find out that I wrote this instead of you. That it was I who got up early to sit in the kitchen and mention with a pen the rain-soaked windows, the ivy, wallpaper, and the goldfish circling in its bowl. Go ahead and turn aside, bite your lip, and tear out the page. But listen, it was just a matter of time before one of us happened to notice the unlit candles and the clock humming on the wall. Plus, nothing happened that morning. A song on the radio, a car whistling along the road outside. And I was only thinking about the shakers of salt and pepper that were standing side by side on a placemat. I wondered if they had become friends after all these years, or if they were still strangers to one another, like you and I, who managed to be known and unknown to each other at the same time. Me at this table with a bowl of pears, you leaning in a doorway somewhere near some blue hydrangeas reading this. Thank you. And this one was just called 1960. In the old joke, the marriage counselor tells the couple who never talks anymore to go to a jazz club, because at a jazz club, everyone talks during the bass solo. But of course, no one starts talking just because of a bass solo, or any other solo for that matter. The quieter bass solo just reveals the people in the club who have been talking all along, the same ones you can hear on some well-known recordings. Bill Evans, for example, who is opening a new door on the piano while some guy chats up his date at one of the little tables in the back. I have listened to that album so many times, I can anticipate the moment of his drunken laugh, as if it were a strange note in the tune. And so, anonymous man, you have become part of my listening, your romance, a romance lost in the past, and a reminder somehow that each member of that trio has died since then, and maybe so have you, and sadly, maybe she. Thank you. I've written quite a few poems about dogs, and you're going to hear some of them, or one anyway. But I went on a trip a little while back, and I came home, and there was a cat in the house. And I looked at Susanna, and she looked at me, and then I looked at the cat, and I looked at her again, and then she looked at the cat. And through this communication, I realized that this was now our cat. You know, when you've been with someone for some time, you don't need words, really. And then I went on another trip, and I came back, and in addition to the black cat, there was a white cat. And we had the same exchange of glances, and now we have two of these critters. So this was written before the second one got in of the expression, and it's called Lucky Cat. It's a law as immutable as the ones governing bodies in motion and bodies at rest that a cat picked up will never stay in the place where you choose to set it down. I bet you'd be happy on the sofa, or on this hassock, or on this knitted throw pillow, or a few examples of bets you are bound to lose. The secret of winning, I have found, is never to bet against the cat, but on the cat, preferably with another human being, who, unlike the cat, is likely to be carrying money. Excuse me. And I cannot think of a better time to thank our cat for her obedience to that law, thus turning me into a consistent winner. She's a pure black one, quite impossible to photograph, and prone to disappearing into the night, or even into the thin shadows of noon. Such an amorphous blob of blackness is she. The only way to tell she is approaching is to notice the two little yellow circles of her eyes, then only one circle when she is walking away, with her tail raised high. Something like the lantern signals of Paul Revere, American silversmith, galloping patriot. These poems are usually explorations, and I think with Arnie's poem, getting to St. Francis was kind of a discovery. You know, was that in there? Yeah, was that you? Because it's just been you and me, so it must have been you. I know it wasn't me. But that's a good example of trying to write a poem about a cat and ending up with Paul Revere. I mean, Paul Revere was certainly the last thing in my mind when I started. But. Well, this seems like a good poem for Martha's Vineyard in the summer. It's called Traffic. Traffic. A child on a silver bicycle, a young mother pushing a stroller, and a runner who looked like he was running to Patagonia have all passed my car, jammed into a traffic jam on a summer weekend. And now an elderly couple slowly overtakes me, as does a family of snails. Me stalled as if in a pit of tar, far from any beach and its salty air. Why, even Buddha has risen from his habitual sitting and is now walking serenely past my car, holding his robes to his chest with one hand. I watch him from the patch of shade I have inched into as he begins to grow smaller and smaller over my steering wheel, then sits down again up ahead, unfurling his palms as if he were only a tiny figure affixed to the dash. Thank you. You know who you are, some only children out there. Only children sounds like an oxymoron because you're an only child. I mean, there are no other children, so you only childs out there, which is the actual plural of only child, is only childs. So I've wanted to address this for some time, and this is the poem called Only Child. I never wished for a sibling, boy or girl. Center of the universe, I had the back of my parents' car all to myself. I could look out one window, then slide over to the other window without any quibbling about territorial rights. And whenever I played a game on the floor of my bedroom, it was always my turn. Not until my parents entered their 90s did I long for a sister, a nurse I named Mary, who worked in a hospital 5 minutes away from where they lived, and who would drop everything, even a thermometer, whenever I called. Be there in a jiff and on my way were two of her favorite expressions, and mine. And now that the parents are dead, I wish I could meet Mary for coffee every now and then at that Italian place with the blue awning, where we could sit and reminisce even on rainy days. I would gaze into her green eyes and see my parents, my mother looking out of Mary's right eye, and my father staring out of her left, which would remind me of what an odd duck I was as a child, a little prince and a loner who would break off from his gang of friends on a Saturday and find a hedge to hide behind. And I would tell Mary all about that too, and never embarrass her by asking about her non-existence. And maybe we would have another espresso and a pastry, and I would always pay the bill and walk her home. Thank you. Here's a few, I'll just read a few rather short poems. And this first one goes back to the cat again, but these are pretty tiny. Well, it's called Predator. It takes only a minute to bury a wren, 2 trowels full of dirt, and he's in. The cat at the threshold is longer in doubt, deciding if she'll stay in or go out. And then another little creature, it's called Irish spider. I remember I first went to Europe. I first was in France, and I'd look around and say, that's a French bird or a French cow. But this is an Irish spider. It was well worth traveling this far just to sit in a box of sunlight by a window in a cottage with a cup of steaming tea and to watch an Irish spider waiting at the center of his dewy web, pretending to be just any spider at all, a spider without a nation, but not fooling me for a minute. And we have some English majors here. If you're an only child and an English major, you can come to the front of the signing line. There we are. So this is especially for English majors, and it's another short poem, and it's called A Note to J. Alfred, Prufrock. I just dared to eat a really big peach, as ripe as it could be, and I have on a pair of plaid shorts and a blue t-shirt with a hole in it, and little rivers of juice are running down my chin now and dripping onto the pool deck. What is your problem, man? I have another short poem. I can't read it just because the first sentence is funny, and then it just doesn't get funny, so it's not good to read. But it's called. But I'll just tell you about it. It's called the first straw. And and it begins. The camel felt nothing. It doesn't improve after that. Arnie, you can finish that one for me. And this is called a list of ancient pastimes. You could say what people did a long time before email. A list of ancient pastimes. First must have come listening to the wind, or regarding the movements of animals, then monitoring the stars, and sometime after that, scrutinizing fire. But somewhere in there belongs watching the progress of a river from an elevated bank, studying the pooling near the edges, the way the smooth or rippled current divulges the secret contours of the unseen bottom, and the effects of skylight on the surface, all the elongated colors of the flow. Today it is my turn on the shore. I flatten the tall grass with my pacing. I lock my elbows and lean back, listening to the liquid rush. I scribble in a notebook, drink from a bottle of water. I find a perfect stone and fling it out into the middle. And sometimes I see something being carried down, a cracked off branch, a bucket on its side, in the late afternoon. or as the dusk gets heavy, the head of Ophelia bobbing along, singing softly to the overhanging trees, or the body of Ophelia held up by her voluminous outspread clothes, so the light so faint now, it is difficult to tell if the red and yellow petals are embroidered into her gown or real, floating on the darkness of the water. So I don't rhyme at the ends of lines. If some husbands have been dragged along to this and are saying, "This, what the hell is this?" I just, just to bring you up to speed, that's not a requirement these days, but it's an ongoing and honorable practice. It's just that I'm not good at it. In fact, I'm pretty sure my next book, I think the title of it, pretty sure the title is going to announce the fact that I'm not a big rhymer, and the title I think will be "The Rain in Portugal." I can't even get that straight. Arnie, don't steal that. Be careful. Yeah. So here's a little poem that the title is drawn from, called On Rhyme. It is possible that a stitch in time may save as many as 12 or as few as 3, and I have no trouble remembering that September has 30 days, as do June, November, and April. I like a cat wearing a chapeau or a trilby, little Jack Horner sitting on a sofa, old men who are not from Nantucket, and how life can seem almost unreal if you are rowing a boat gently down a stream. So instead of listening again to where it mostly pours in Spain, I am going to picture the rain in Portugal, how it falls on the hillside vineyards, on the surface of the deep harbors where fishing boats are swaying, and on the narrow alleys of the cities, and there, 3 boys in T-shirts kicking a soccer ball in the rain, ignoring the window cries of their mothers. Thank you very much. Let's see. So I'll read some of this from this new book, Aimless Love. A poem called the Sandhill Cranes of Nebraska. Too bad you weren't here 6 months ago, was a lament I heard on my visit to Nebraska. You could have seen the astonishing spectacle of the Sandhill cranes, thousands of them feeding and even dancing on the shores of the Platte River. There was no point in pointing out the impossibility of my being there then, because I happened to be somewhere else, so I nodded and put on a look of mild disappointment, if only to be part of the commiseration. It was the same look I remember wearing about 6 months ago in Georgia, when I was told I had just missed the spectacular annual outburst of azaleas, brilliant against the green backdrop of spring. And the same in Vermont. 6 months before that, when I arrived shortly after the magnificent foliage had gloriously peaked, Mother Nature, as she is called, having touched the hills with her many-colored brush. A phenomenon that occurs, like the others, around the same time every year, when I am apparently off in another state, stuck in a motel lobby with a local paper in a styrofoam cup of coffee, busily missing God knows what. Thank you so much. Well, I wanted to read, we've been having a great time doing very little at the beach just really enjoyable. And I wanted to read at least one poem that has something to do with the beach. And this is a love poem in which I just draw on a childhood memory of going to the beach, being at the beach as a child. And it's called Orient. You are turning me like someone turning a globe in her hand. And yes, I have another side, like a china no one, not even me, has ever seen. So describe to me what's there, say what you are looking at, and I will close my eyes so I can see it too, the ox carts and all the lively flags. I love the sound of your voice like a little saxophone, telling me what I could never know unless I dug a hole all the way down through the core of myself. So it's saying you could dig a hole to China and all that. I actually saw a hole this afternoon. It had a pretty good start. Had a shot. Keep going, Timmy. Mother and I will be at the surf bar. Okay. Speaking of the surf bar, I didn't intend that, but this is a poem called "Drinking Alone," and it was supposed to be. I wanted to write an imitation of a poem by the Chinese poet Li Po, who has a lovely poem, Drinking Alone. I was going to write a kind of my version or updated version of it. So I did what you're supposed to do. I wrote Drinking Alone, the same title, and then I wrote the phrase after Li Po, which is what you do, right after Neruda or whoever. And this is what happened here. Drinking Alone after Li Po. This is not after Li Po, the way the state is after me for neglecting to pay all my taxes, nor the way I am after the woman in front of me on the long line at the post office. Li Po, I am not saying after you, as I stand holding open one of the heavy glass doors that divide the centuries in a long corridor of glass doors. No, the only way this is after you is in the way they say, it's just one thing after another. Like the way I will pause to raise a glass of wine to you after I finish writing this poem. So let me get back to sitting in the wind alone among the pines with a pencil in my hand. After all, you had your turn, and mine will soon be done. Then someone else will sit here after me. So that turned out okay. Thank you. Yes. Mom. Here's my Astro twin. Well, my mother here should be 114, so that with 107, with Peggy, and who knows. So here's a little poem based on something you hear, an expression you hear a lot. It's called "Oh My God," with an exclamation point. The speaker is really naive. Oh my God. Not only in church and nightly by their bedsides do young girls pray these days. Wherever they go, prayer is woven into their talk like a bright thread of awe. Even at the pedestrian mall, outbursts of praise spring unbidden from their glossy lips. And thank you. And that, I think, sort of sets up this poem, which is about a user of the "Oh my God" expression. And it's called "To My Favorite 17-Year-Old High School Girl." Do you realize that if you had started building the Parthenon on the day you were born, you'd be all done in only one more year? Of course, you couldn't have done that by yourself, so never mind. You're fine just as you are. You are loved for simply being yourself. But did you know that at your age, Judy Garland was pulling down $150,000 a picture? Joan of Arc was leading the French army to victory, and Blaise Pascal had cleaned up his room. No, wait, he's the one who invented the calculator. Of course, there will be time for that later in your life, after you come out of your room and begin to blossom, or at least pick up all your socks. For some reason, I keep remembering that Lady Jane Grey was Queen of England when she was only 15. But then she was beheaded, so never mind her as a role model. But a few centuries later, when he was your age, Franz Schubert was doing the dishes for his family. But that did not keep him from composing 2 symphonies, 4 operas, and 2 complete masses as a youngster. But of course, that was in Austria at the height of Romantic lyricism, not here in the suburbs of Cleveland. Frankly, who cares if Annie Oakley was a crack shot at 15 or if Maria Callas debuted as Tosca at 17? We think you are special by just being you. Playing with your food and staring into space. By the way, I lied about Schubert doing the dishes, but that doesn't mean he never helped out around the house. Let's strike a chord. Well, it struck a chord, and the young lady I wrote it about, she didn't talk to me for 2 years. It's not a good chord, but it was a chord. So let's bring a dog or two on here. This is a dog who's 2 dogs are, both of these dogs could be said to have written the poems, or they're sort of dog soliloquies. And this is fairly short. The dog is thinking about life with his master. A dog on his master. As young as I look, I am growing older faster than he. 7 to 1 is the ratio they tend to say. Whatever the number, I will pass him one day and take the lead, the way I do on our walks in the woods. And if this ever manages to cross his mind, it would be the sweetest shadow I have ever cast on snow or grass. So, very hard. So very hard to write about dogs and cats. Well, easier with cats for me so far, but without getting sentimental. So some of you know this poem. I wrote this poem to prove to myself I could write a poem about a dog that was free of false emotion, free of sentimentality. And it's called The Revenant. I am the dog you put to sleep, as you like to call the needle of oblivion. Come back to tell you this simple thing: I never liked you. When I licked your face, I thought of biting off your nose. When I watched you toweling yourself dry, I wanted to leap and unman you with a snap. I resented the way you moved, your lack of animal grace, the way you would sit in a chair to eat, a napkin on your lap, a knife in your hand. I would have run away, but I was too weak, a trick you taught me while I was learning to sit and heel, and greatest of insults, shake hands without a hand. I admit the sight of the leash would excite me, but only because it meant... I admit the sight of the leash would excite me, but only because it meant I was about to smell things you had never touched. You do not want to believe this, but I have no reason to lie. I hated the car, hated the rubber toys, disliked your friends, and worse, your relatives. The jingling of my tags drove me mad. You always scratched me in the wrong place. All I had wanted from you was food and fresh water and my metal bowls. While you slept, I watched you breathe as the moon rose in the sky. It took all of my strength not to raise my head and howl. Now I am free of the collar, free of the yellow raincoat, monogrammed sweater, the absurdity of your lawn. And that is all you need to know about this place, except what you already supposed and are glad it did not happen sooner, that everyone here can read and write, the dogs in poetry, the cats and all the others in prose. Thank you. So that's pretty much where I stand on the dog-cat. Maybe I'll cross the aisle at some point. Well, I'm going to read this poem only because Arnie said he was going to read it, and I said, no, you're not going to read this. And he said, you're sure you're going to read it, so I have to read it. Okay. Anyway, it's the title of one of the books, and it's called The Trouble with Poetry. Actually, the title of the book was The Trouble with Poetry and Other Poems, which I thought was fairly funny. I mean, at the time, like a funny tattoo. That was sort of seemed pretty funny at the moment. The Trouble with Poetry. The trouble with poetry, I realized as I walked along a beach one night, cold, Florida sand under my bare feet, a show of stars in the sky. The trouble with poetry is that it encourages the writing of more poetry, more guppies crowding the fish tank, more baby rabbits hopping out of their mothers into the dewy grass. And how will it ever end unless the day finally arrives when we have compared everything in the world to everything else in the world, and there is nothing left to do then but quietly close our notebooks and sit with our hands folded on our desks. Poetry fills me with joy, and I rise like a feather in the wind. Poetry fills me with sorrow, and I sink like a chain flung from a bridge. But mostly, poetry fills me with the urge to write poetry, to sit in the dark and wait for a little flame to appear at the tip of my pencil. And along with that, the longing to steal, to break into the poems of others with a flashlight and a ski mask. And what an unmerry band of thieves we are, cut purses, common shoplifters, I thought to myself, as a cold wave swirled around my feet, and the lighthouse moved its megaphone over the sea, which is an image I stole directly from Lawrence Ferlinghetti. To be perfectly honest for a moment, the bicycling poet of San Francisco, whose little amusement park of a book I used to carry in a side pocket of my uniform up and down the treacherous halls of high school. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, just let me throw a dart here. Here's a poem. Another, like, oh my God, a lot of poems tend to come out of hearing conversations and hearing little ticks that come into the language and mannerisms, ideographic, is that a word? I don't know. Idiomatic, thank you. ways of speaking. So it's called After the Funeral. When you told me you needed a drink, and not just a drink like a drink of water, I steered you by the elbow into a bar, which turned out to be a real bar. Dim and nearly empty, with little tables in the back, where we drank and agreed that the funeral was a real funeral, complete with a mass, incense, and tons of eulogies. You know, I always considered Tom a real friend, you said, lifting your drink to your lips. And I agreed that Tom was very much more than an ordinary friend. We also concurred that Angela's black dress was elegant, but not like elegant, just elegant enough. And a few hours later, when the bartender brought yet another round of whiskeys to our table in the corner, we recognized by his apron and by his mighty girth that he was more than just a bartender. A true bartender was what he was. We decided, with a respectful clink of our drinks, amber in a chink of afternoon light. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's nice out tonight, isn't it? Yeah. It rained last time I was here, I think, pretty heavily, but it's okay. Okay, well, enough of that. Back to work, Collins. Not paying you to free associate here. In the Metropolitan Museum, some years ago, not too long ago, there was opened a gallery to display Greek and Roman statuary, and with a beautiful translucent roof, so that the marble statues were just so evenly bathed in light. So I wrote a poem, having seen that, and it's mostly about the loss of parts of the bodies that didn't survive. That they have a hard time surviving. It's hard enough for us to get to 100, let alone a couple of thousand years old. Greek and Roman statuary. Excuse me. The tip of the nose seemed to be the first to be lost, then the arms and legs, and later the stone penis, if such a thing were featured. And often an entire head followed the nose, as it might have done when bread was baking in the side streets of ancient Rome. No hope for the flute once attached to the lips of that satyr with the puffed-out cheeks, nor for the staff of the shepherd boy once leaned on. The sword no longer gripped by the warrior, the poor lost ear of the sleeping boy, and whatever it was Aphrodite once held in her severed hand. But the torso is another story. Middleman, the last to go, bluntly surviving, sometimes propped up on a pedestal with a length of pipe, and the mighty stone ass endures, so smooth and fundamental, no one hesitates to leave the group and walk behind to stare. And that is the way it goes here in the diffused light from the translucent roof, one missing extremity after another, digits that got too close to the slicer of time, hands snapped off by a clock, whole limbs caught in the mortal thresher. But outside, on the city streets, it is raining, and the pavement shines with the crisscross traffic of living bodies. Hundreds of noses still intact, arms swinging, hands grasping, the skin still warm, foreheads glistening. It's anyone's guess when the day will come when there is nothing left of us but the bare, solid plinth we once stood upon, now exposed to the open air, just the wind in the trees and the shadows of clouds sweeping over its hard marble surface. Well, look at the time. Well, here's a few few older poems. I wanted to read here's a poem with, I think, a big, so in this book, a big helpful title. It's called I Chopped Some Parsley While Listening to Art Blakey's version of Three Blind Mice. And as they say, true story. Well, that part's true anyway. I chopped some parsley while listening to Art Blakey's version of Three Blind Mice, and I start wondering how they came to be blind. If it was congenital, they could be brothers and sisters. Then I think of the poor mother brooding over his sightless young triplets. Or was it a common accident? All three caught in a searing explosion, a firework perhaps. If not, if each came to his or her blindness separately, how did they ever manage to find one another? Would it not be difficult for a blind mouse to locate even one fellow mouse with vision, let alone two other blind ones? And how, in their tiny darkness, could they possibly have run after a farmer's wife? Or anyone else's wife, for that matter? Not to mention why. Just so she could cut off their tails with a carving knife is the cynic's answer. But the thought of them without eyes, and now without tails, to trail through the moist grass or slip around the corner of a baseboard has the cynic who always lounges within me up off his couch and at the window, trying to hide the rising softness that he feels. By now, I am on to dicing an onion, which might account for the wet stinging in my own eyes, though Freddie Hubbard's mournful trumpet on Blue Moon, which happens to be the next cut, cannot be said to be making matters any better. So, okay, great. So here are two poems that seem to be, this is really, I don't want to, it's a poem I like reading, and I don't want to forget to read it. It's called Forgetfulness. And it's about all kinds of forgetfulness, but the first kind, the initial kind, is forgetting what you've read, stuff you've read. Forgetfulness. The name of the author is the first to go, followed obediently by the title, the plot, the heartbreaking conclusion, the entire novel, which suddenly becomes one you have never read, never even heard of. It is as if one by one the memories you used to harbor decided to retire to the southern hemisphere of the brain, to a little fishing village where there are no phones. Long ago you kissed the names of the 9 muses goodbye, and you watched the quadratic equation pack its bag. And even now, as you memorize the order of the planets, something else is slipping away, a state flower perhaps, the address of an uncle, the capital of Paraguay. Whatever it is you are struggling to remember, it is not poised on the tip of your tongue. It is not even lurking in some obscure corner of your spleen. It has floated away down a dark mythological river whose name begins with an L, as far as you can recall. Well on your own way to oblivion, where you will join those who have forgotten even how to swim and how to ride a bicycle. No wonder you rise in the middle of the night to look up the date of a famous battle in a book on war. No wonder the moon in the window seems to have drifted out of a love poem that you used to know by heart. Thank you so much. So I want to read what is not, I didn't write these two with them in mind of each other, but if that actually is a sentence, but they were written independently. But in hindsight, they seem to have there seemed to be some linkage there, because if the guy in that poem couldn't remember anything, this speaker can't forget anything. So it's really about, well, if you remember the 20th century, a little bit here and there, yeah, some highlights there. So one of the things we did in the 20th century, among other things, many other things really, was we were very decade conscious. You know, we talk about the 50s and the 90s, and we kind of sliced the past into these convenient little modules and attributed to them, you know, personalities, very winning personalities. And we always seem to feel nostalgic about their passing. You know, there go the 60s and so on. So this is a takeoff on that, and that's why it's called nostalgia. Remember the 1340s? We were doing a dance called the catapult. You always wore brown, the color craze of the decade. And I was draped in one of those capes that were popular, the ones with unicorns and pomegranates and needlework. Everyone would pause for beer and onions in the afternoon, and at night we would play a game called Find the Cow. Everything was hand-lettered back then, not like today. Where is the summer of 1572 gone? Brocade and sonnet marathons were the rage. We used to dress up in the flags of rival baronies and conquer one another in cold rooms of stone. Out on the dance floor, we were all doing the struggle, while your sister practiced the Daphne all alone in her room. We borrowed the jargon of farriers for our slang. These days, language seems transparent, a badly broken code. The 1790s will never come again. Childhood was big. We would take walks to the very tops of hills and write down what we saw in our journals without speaking. Our collars were high, our hats were extremely soft. We would surprise each other with alphabets made of twigs. It was a wonderful time to be alive, or even dead. I am very fond of the period between 1815 and 1821. Europe trembled while we sat still for our portraits. And I would love to return to 1901, if only for a moment, time enough to wind up a music box and do a few dance steps. Or shoot me back to 1922 or 1941, or at least let me recapture the serenity of last month when we picked berries together and glided through afternoons in a canoe. Even this morning would be an improvement over the present. I was in the garden then, surrounded by the hum of bees and the Latin names of flowers, watching the early light flash off the slanted windows of the greenhouse and silver the limbs on the rows of dark hemlocks. As usual, I was thinking about the moments of the past, letting my memory rush over them like water rushing over the stones on the bottom of a stream. I was even thinking a little about the future, that place where people are doing a dance we cannot imagine, a dance whose name we can only guess. Okay, I'm going to read just a couple of short poems, and then I'll finish with that. And then we can have, if you're not double parked or anything, we can have a little chat. Well, this is pretty short. This is something you hear on the radio a lot, especially if you listen to NPR. It's called Surprise. This, according to the voice on the radio, the host of a classical music program no less, this is the birthday of Vivaldi. He would be 325 years old today, quite bent over, I would imagine, and not able to see much through his watery eyes. Surely he would be deaf by now, the clothes flaking off him, hair pitiably sparse. But we would throw a party for him anyway, a surprise party, where everyone would hide behind the furniture to listen for the tap of his cane on the pavement and the sound of that dry, persistent cough. If you like that, you're a little crazy. And then this is 8 lines long, and it's called No Time. In a rush this weekday morning, I tap the horn as I speed past the cemetery where my parents lie buried side by side under a smooth slab of granite. Then all day long I think of him rising up to give me that look of knowing disapproval, while my mother calmly tells him to lie back down. Okay. Boy, you guys are a tough audience here. All right, okay. Well, this is a good time to read this because this is the midsummer. The production of lanyards is reaching a high watermark. According to an article in Camper Monthly, one lanyard is produced about every 19 seconds nationally. So this would be a good time to read it. And thank you for your encouragement. The lanyard. The other day, as I was ricocheting slowly off the pale blue walls of this room, bouncing from typewriter to piano, from bookshelf to an envelope lying on the floor, I found myself in the L section of the dictionary, where my eyes fell upon the word lanyard. No cookie nibbled by a French novelist could send one more suddenly into the past. A past where I sat at a workbench at a camp by a deep Adirondack lake, learning how to braid thin plastic strips into a lanyard, a gift from my mother. I had never seen anyone use a lanyard, or wear one if that's what you did with them, but that did not keep me from crossing strand over strand again and again until I had made a boxy red and white lanyard for my mother. She gave me life and milk from her breasts, and I gave her a lanyard. She nursed me in many a sick room, lifted teaspoons of medicine to my lips, set cold face cloths on my forehead, and led me out into the airy light and taught me to walk and swim, and I in turn presented her with a lanyard. Here are thousands of meals, she said, and here is clothing and a good education. And here is your lanyard, I replied, which I made with a little help from a counselor. Here is a breathing body and a beating heart, strong legs, bones and teeth, and 2 clear eyes to read the world, she whispered. And here, I said, is the lanyard I made a cab. And here I wish to say to her now is a smaller gift, not the archaic truth that you can never repay your mother, but the rueful admission that when she took the 2-tone lanyard from my hands, I was as sure as a boy could be that this useless, worthless thing I wove out of boredom would be enough to make us even. Thank you.